What if the U.S. just lost the global energy war and didn't even see it coming? In March 2025, China made a single announcement that sent shockwaves across the world economy. Out of nowhere, it cut off $2.4 billion worth of liquefied natural gas imports from the U.S. Just like that, America lost access to its second-largest energy market. Was it a sudden policy shift? Not quite. It was retaliation. 1 month earlier, the U.S. slapped a 10% tariff on Chinese goods. China didn't respond with words. It responded with something far more powerful: energy. But that was just the opening move. Hours after the suspension, China rerouted its LNG shipments, not back home, but to Europe. And Europe, still scrambling to replace Russian energy supplies, welcomed it with open arms. Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands fast-tracked new import deals. EU leaders launched storage initiatives, invested in ports, and expanded energy transfer systems at record speed. While American LNG terminals sat idle, filled with unsold stock, billions of dollars were flowing. Just not to the U.S. As Washington reeled, Australia made its move. With barely a headline, Australia signed a $1.5 billion deal with China's energy giant, China Resources Gas. The deal? A 15-year contract to supply 600,000 tons of LNG annually starting in 2027. Here's the kicker: Australian LNG is not only 20% cheaper, it also arrives 10 days faster than American gas. Geography, cost, and now politics are all working in Australia's favor. The message was clear: China doesn't just want energy, it wants loyalty on its own terms. And Australia, a longtime U.S. ally, just shifted into Beijing's orbit. But while LNG deals were changing the global balance of power, another key U.S. partner was making its own move. And this one hurt even more. While Washington was busy dealing with the LNG shock, Canada was sealing the deal behind the scenes. China didn't just want gas, it wanted a stable oil supplier too. And when the U.S. hit Canadian oil with a 10% tariff, Beijing saw its chance. Through the Trans Mountain expansion, Canada ramped up exports to China, boosting capacity from 300,000 barrels per day to nearly 890,000. That's not just a logistics upgrade, it's a geopolitical shift. Meanwhile, the LNG Canada project, one of North America's largest, gears up to launch with 26 million tons per year. It's a massive operation, and China is first in line to buy. The U.S. didn't just lose a deal, it lost a long-term strategic role. And now, two of its closest allies, Canada and Australia, are powering China's future. This wasn't just about energy. China kept going, cutting deep into America's economy where it hurts the most: agriculture and industry. By 2024, U.S. soybean exports to China had already plummeted from 40% to just 18%. Then came the wipeout. Wheat, corn, and cotton, gone. Replaced by Brazil, Argentina, and even Europe. American pork exports crashed, while Spain and the Netherlands stepped in as the new pork kings. Why? Competitive pricing, better food safety, and no trade drama. On the ground, U.S. farmers are overproducing, losing profits, and in many cases, going bankrupt. Smaller farms can't pivot fast enough. And now, with China out of the picture, they're stuck. And it's not just the farms. Tech giants like Tesla and Intel are watching China turn its back. Chinese partnerships shift to Canada, Europe, and BRICS nations. The result? A slow, painful bleed-out of U.S. global influence. So what does Washington do when the economy's falling apart? In February 2025, the Trump administration doubled down on tariffs, raising them to 20% on Chinese goods. The response? Another wave of retaliation from China. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, Trump unveiled a new project, the F-47 fighter jet. Touted as the most lethal aircraft ever built, it was sold as a national achievement. But behind the flash, Americans noticed something else. A $445,000 Birkin bag party held the same week the U.S. GDP dropped 2.5%. Consumer confidence was already in free fall, even among households earning six figures. And now, while the country struggled with inflation and job insecurity, the president was hosting luxury fundraisers and posting mugshot memes. Was there an actual plan? Or just political theater? And while the economy slid further, Trump made one of his most controversial moves yet, one that left even his allies stunned. As tensions with China and economic pressure mounted, Trump turned heads with something no one saw coming. He called the U.S.-Canada border an artificial divide and floated the idea of Canada becoming part of the United States. To many, it sounded like a joke, but others weren't laughing. Canada is one of the U.S.'s largest trade partners, with over $600 billion in bilateral trade. The backlash was immediate. Canadian officials fired back, not with words, but with action. They strengthened defense ties with Europe and Australia, deepened trade with Japan and South Korea, and ramped up energy exports to China. Trump may have thought he was asserting dominance. Instead, he pushed America's closest ally into China's waiting arms. Just as the U.S. scrambled to react, OPEC pulled the rug out again, cutting oil production to drive up prices. The U.S. tried to respond with more shale oil, but the math didn't work. It's more expensive to extract, harder to fund under ESG rules, and can't compete long-term with cheap Middle Eastern crude. Meanwhile, the world is moving on. By 2025, global EV sales are projected to hit 20 million units. Countries are phasing out gasoline cars faster than expected. The oil age is winding down, and the U.S., once the king of fossil fuels, is getting squeezed from every direction. OPEC from one side, electrification from the other. Add to that a shrinking strategic petroleum reserve, and America's energy independence starts to look more like an illusion. Energy, agriculture, technology, trade. The very foundations of America's global dominance are being restructured. Without a single vote cast, China isn't just reacting, it's replacing. Every time the U.S. escalates, China finds a new supplier, signs a new contract, or builds a new pipeline. And while Washington talks tariffs and tweets, Beijing quietly builds the future. So the question is this a short-term economic hiccup, or the beginning of a long-term decline? Because one thing is clear, power is no longer decided by bombs or speeches. It's decided by deals. And right now, the U.S. is not closing them. Subscribe to stay ahead of the next big shift, because the next move, it's already in motion.